David, how are you, sir?
I'm very well. How are you? Great to
Yes,
see you again, Chris.
I'm absolutely firing. Really great to have you on the show. Your latest book, I'm just going to get a picture on the screen. Dun dun dun. Viking Superpowers, Way of Asgard. Do the Viking myths contain ancestral memories of ancient high technology and powerful spacefaring humanoids who bred with and colonized the north of the world? Massive
That's it.
congratulations on that, and welcome back to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, mate. I enjoyed it so much last time we talked, and I often watch your show. And I think a lot about my cousins over there in Old Blighty.
Yeah, we think a lot about the convicts down there in Old Oz.
Yeah, we got our chains off a long time ago, but we're still a little bit like we used to be.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely joking, of course, because I feel like we're brothers and sisters, and you know,
Yeah, I was brought up to think that, very much. My parents and my grandparents were very proud to be British. I was brought up to be proud to be British. I didn't know anybody was criticizing it until I was quite a bit older and went, oh, okay.
yeah. Again, it relates to what I was saying in the introduction. It's ego, isn't it? We've got to transcend our ego. We've got to get over this 3D material self and
Mm,
reach a state of enlightenment consciousness. And the only way, as JC said, the only way is through me, through Christ consciousness, is by finding love or activating love. And you can't do that if you hate your cousins, down under or across the pond or
yeah,
whatever, or you're bombing Russia, or you're doing likewise to Ukraine or whatever it might be. Um, world's got world's got a lot to learn sometimes, I think.
yes. And I think we common people could teach the leaders a lot if they could listen to us, but I don't know how many actually ever do. They live in their own bubble. And I've always found it very frustrating that we can't talk directly to our leaders and say, come on, what are we doing? Why are we still having wars and all this hate at this time? Come on, try a bit harder. But
Yeah, I
who
think
knows how
uh,
it really works?
I think it's because they pick the dummies to be the that thing that leaders are selected, not elected.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, Paul Wallace is, he's a absolute scholar when it comes to the Bible, but he's also deeply into Plato and Platonic thought and Neoplatonism. And he sort of turned me onto Plato. I always had a bit of an interest, but my main thing has always been, Old Norse. But I love history generally. I know quite a bit about many different eras. But reading Plato, I realized that 2,500 years ago, he was talking about what happens to the soul when we die. And this particular story, this guy who it's called the myth of Er, and this young soldier comes back to life after he's dead for 9 days. They're about to burn him on a funeral pyre. Comes back to life and he tells them all about where he's been and what he saw. And it was a big influence on early Christianity, the way of thinking. But Plato is essentially saying that each life we get to choose who we're going to be next time, and that the foolish people choose to be really wealthy and great tyrants and kings. But then this guide shows the young guy. He says, "Who's those people going down under the earth?" And he says, "Oh, that's a bad place to go. That's all the people who just had a life of being really wealthy and powerful and who became tyrants and they did terrible things to their fellow man. Now they're going to get punished for that." And he said, "Who are these people here? They're coming back from getting punished, and they're actually a fair bit wiser now, and so they'll choose to just be some ordinary dude who doesn't really bother other people and lives a life, like you're saying, of love and enlightenment. So, that's what Plato thought. We go through a lot of cycles. Essentially, it was all about reincarnation. So it's very much that
Absolutely. I
Indian
mean,
idea.
best job in the world must just be a beachcomber.
Yeah.
Simple life, live in a shack. I don't know if you get Netflix or whatever your thing is, but you 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 wander along the beach in the sun every morning, wondering what life has brought you. And
I've done it. I lived on the beach for about 6 months. Um, that was my whole dream, was just to be this surfer guy that lived on the land, grew his own food. I had it all planned out. It didn't quite work out. It wasn't quite as easy as I thought. I spent a lot of time living on pancakes and bananas, which people used to give me bananas, and I just had flour and water to make pancakes and the odd toasted sandwich. But yeah, that life, we have a wonderful life here. It's just amazing. Our beaches are just tropical paradise. They're just like something out of Robinson Crusoe. And I spent a lot of my life just walking on beaches, surfing, swimming, thinking, God, I'm lucky to be born here. And
absolutely. Getting onto the scripture, I mean, Paul Wallace and I, we had some exchange back along where I was, you know, when you're a YouTuber, your paths cross with a lot of YouTubers on different subjects, and I love, um, I love the spiritual simply because it's so bloody clever, David. It's so clever that most people will never get it or even understand what it is. They probably think it's like religion or,
mm,
hippies and joss sticks or something like that. And what it actually is it's many things, but it's the code for life. It's the code to control your biochemistry so you fire not only as your the micro in the universe, but you also understand your universe itself. And that means getting over the ego and all the trials and tribulations that go with thinking that a Ferrari's going to make you happy, or drugs or
mm.
alcohol, is like the way forward, or etc., etc., etc. Reason I mention it is I I really haven't looked at Paul's stuff lately, but like the book there says that Eden Enigma, and he's got a
Mm.
picture. He's got a picture of the famous Sumerian. Um, I believe it's a tablet or is it a wall frieze? But either way, it's Sumerian art. And
It sort of looks like it's metal to me, that one. I actually feature quite a bit in that book.
yeah, and I just wanted to say, David, is that you got this guy there. So he's holding the
Mm.
pine cone. Yeah. Oh,
Yep,
brilliant.
that's it. Yep.
He's holding the pine cone representative of the pineal gland. He's got the wings, which representative of enlightenment, and he's carrying the bag. And a lot of people don't know what the bag is. They say there's a lot of debate about it, but I would argue it's it's enlightenment itself. It's even maybe like a bit more than chi. So my question to you is, and then when you get in Eden, you had Adam and Eve, and they went east of Eden, didn't they? Allegory for going to the right side of the brain, for accessing the love, the peace, the kindness, the empathy, rather than like the dogma and the rationality and the dirt,
Mm.
dirt, dirt. No, it's science, it's mathematics, it's dirt, dirt, dirt. So, it, where does Paul lie on this sort of theory base, whatever we're going to call it?
Very much in the same way I think we both are looking for a pragmatic, ancient, contact with advanced humanoids story, and whilst at the same time also seeing the spiritual story and the allegories and the sort of like wordless stories. That's, the right side of the brain is the artistic side, is the visionary side, and that's very much a part of my thinking, is that people think that the left brain, all the text-based, verbal, logical stuff is, that's human intelligence, whereas my own journey through art and yoga and kung fu, and other things, even my spiritual time when I was younger, as a Christian, I learned a lot about just accessing faith, which is really not about thinking. It's sort of, I walk by faith and not by sight. That attitude has helped me, even though I'm not a traditional Christian anymore, but right through my life, I've learned to step out into the dark, to trust that the great mind is looking after me, that the great spirit is on my side, and just step out into the dark. I don't know what I'm doing, but I have this faith that it'll all be okay. And that step of faith is one of the big things. And Paul talks about that. People often don't quite pick that up in his work, but I always see it, that he's saying, yes, I believe that there was the ancient texts are talking about very high tech, powerful beings that came to the earth for different reasons. I say the same in Viking Superpowers, Way of Asgard. We both find the same stories in there, but also he talks about, a liberated spirituality, and like you're doing, discovering how to connect with yourself, discovering how to connect with the great self, what the Indians call the Atman and Para Atman, self, the great self, no ego. To tell the truth, when I was young, I knew I was intelligent, a bit more intelligent than the average person, but I quickly came to the realization that my intelligence would tie me up in knots. And when I first got into meditating, mainly through yoga and then through this type of kung fu I practice, it's a sort of a no-mindedness practice. And I discovered that there was this knowledge in there that you can't put into words, that seems illogical, but it's so profoundly right and powerful. And
Now, these things have just given up on me. Can you
That's
still hear
okay.
me?
So long as you
Can you
can
hear
hear
me okay?
me,
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
yeah, absolutely perfect.
Good one, mate. I thought I'd charged them. They just told me, sorry, we're on the way out. So,
Hey, never work with children, animals, or technology.
yeah, it actually reminds me of that famous scene in, I think it's, that Bruce Willis famous movie about the Twin Towers, the one. There's
Yeah,
three movies.
was it one of the Die Hard ones?
Yeah, Die Hard, that's it. And there's this famous part where this terrorist monster dude is talking, giving out his threats to the world, and his guy's filming, and he sees the battery lights flashing, and you can see the guy start to sweat. He's thinking, "Oh no, I'm going to get shot," and the thing gives up in the middle of the great, threatening speech, and the camera battery dies. So yeah, it happens.
Yeah, there's a whole YouTube video there, isn't there, of the times when your battery died on someone's phone and it really didn't end well. um,
Yeah.
yeah. So David, you know, let's get into it then. So starting with your book, can you we can I think what I'm getting at is I think we could chat forever. So, but I want to put you in the best light with your new work. So
Mm-hmm.
so we better get into it.
Yeah.
What's Viking Superpowers? So could you very briefly outline what that means to us lesser folk?
Yep. Well, it's essentially that I've discovered through retranslating the what people call the Viking sagas and the Viking myths, the myths of Asgard, Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki. A lot of people only know these names through the Marvel movies, but a lot of other people are aware of them from different sources. But I've gone in and retranslated these stories because I've been studying Icelandic for many, many years, and finding that rather than being stories of mythical beings, fairy tales, they seem to be actual stories about actual powerful people in the very ancient past who ruled over first the Middle East, around Turkey, especially around Anatolia. And then we're told, in the ancient stories that they traveled to the north and they interbred with the humans in, France and Russia and Saxony and Denmark, Sweden, Norway, eventually England, and they could fly, and they had great cities that when you read the descriptions, they go from being this fairy tale to very concrete dwelling places that seem to be made for war. And that seemed to be, I think, based on huge flying craft, like the sort of stuff people report now seeing in the skies. And I think that there's links with the Bible. I haven't purposely gone out of my way to say, oh, yes, this is the same thing, but I have found a lot of things that point towards these ancient stories and the Bible and other Mesopotamian stories talking about the same sort of beings and probably tribes of beings. So that's the superpower of these super powerful people, mortals, not gods, not creators of the universe, but they live for a very long time. And there's therapies that they have, which is talked about in my book, and it's in the old sagas. But also the superpowers you and I were just talking about, the human superpowers that are suppressed in our society, and there's no doubt at all that they are suppressed. It's almost exactly the same the way the knowledge of UFOs, UAPs, flying saucers, extraterrestrials is suppressed in our society. It's like, oh yeah, that's rubbish. Only soft-headed people believe that. You're a liar or a charlatan if you tell me stories about seeing great craft or having a close encounter with a person from another place. This is just rubbish. And people say the same thing about the powers of telepathy, clairvoyance, even telekinesis, remote viewing. All these sort of things are considered in the same bag. This is, we're scientific, we're logical, we're super powerful in our left brain. Don't give us that trippy crap because it's not real. Any intelligent person knows it's not real. That's what they tell us. And so our whole culture suppresses it by just ignoring it and mocking it and saying it doesn't exist. But there are cultures around the world who haven't done that and who absolutely believe in these abilities. You look at the Indian culture, look at Japan, even old China, so many places, and the Vikings also, they believe in reincarnation. There's so much indicating in the old sagas that paranormal abilities were considered normal. They weren't witches. That's the church laid that on them.
Getting back to your book cover. Sorry, folks, technical glitch. David, we were looking at your book cover, and I was asking, very briefly, Way of Asgard. Can you just explain in a sentence what that means?
Yeah, I'm focusing on Asgard, which is the ancient great city of the Aesir, which is the Norse word for the gods, Odin, Thor, and Loki, and such characters.
Roger. And what is the gold? The little gold thingamajig looks like it should be a brooch or something.
Yeah, well, it actually is a brooch. When I went to Scandinavia last year to research this book, I made a beeline for it's a city called Lund. It's not one that the average English speaker knows, but it used to be a very prominent city in Sweden in the old days.
I've worked in Lund.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Well, you know it. So the university has a great museum with lots of periods, the Bronze Age, which I was really into, the Viking Age, and, the in-betweens. But that brooch is called the Voldand Brooch.
Okay.
It's VO with 2 dots and then LUND. So it's only a recent find. It was found about 10 years ago in a place called Upakra, which is where they've been digging up this incredible Viking Age temple, one of the first that they found. And they found that near the porch of the temple, the sort of the outdoor area. And it's a brooch representing this elf, Voland. And in England, you call it Wayland the Smith. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Yeah, it's an obscure thing nowadays, but it used to be sort of well known, Wayland the Smith. So he was this elf who was a master craftsman. He gets captured by this evil king and queen. They hamstring him by cutting the sinews behind his knees so he can't get away, and they force him to make all sorts of incredible treasures for them, gold and jewels, whatever. So he plots his revenge, and eventually he builds a flying machine. And it literally says, there's 2 sagas. It's amazing. There's 2 sagas that talk about this story. One of them is called Voldand Brooch, and it's in the Poetic Edda, which is a book of the older poems and stories. And another one called Thithrek's Saga af Beren. And it's called Valiant Saga. And that goes into great detail, but long and the short of it is there's 2 sagas and this brooch that talk about this guy who built a flying machine, and it's pre-Viking Age, so it's probably another 1,000 years older than the Viking Age, so it's maybe time of Christ, maybe earlier, the stories. But when I looked at that brooch, I sort of went there because I'd seen it online. I thought, my God, this thing's just, it's anachronistic. It shouldn't even be there. When I went there and had a close look at it, I took heaps of photos and video, and I realized that it's got a lot of odd things about it, including it's got ailerons. Do you have any aviation background?
I've got my pilot's license.
Oh, well, you know what ailerons are. So the wings, he's got these eagle wings, which are a representation, but the bottom third of the wings, there's a line across, and to me, they just have to be ailerons. And he's got the tail surface, the elevator at the bottom. Now, just above that tail, you'll see 2 shapes that look almost like hooks or claws or something round about where his backside would be. And I believe they're flames. I believe they're sculpturally created flames. And I think it's a jet motor. And nobody's given me a good sort of rebuttal to this. They say, one guy was really having a go one day saying, oh, they're claws or they're straps, but none of the other straps look like that. These things they sort of taper and they become bulbous, and then they come to a point, they're split at the end. There's just a little gouge. And for me, as a long-time professional artist, they're just the way I would actually sculpt flames if I was going to do it. So why is there flames there? When I look at the top of the wings, you see those 2 knobs?
Yep, the two kind of roundish things.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you can see it. I can't remember off the top of my head whether you can see it there. I think you can, but you see, there's like a spiral around them. There's a little line, but it actually is not just a circle. It spirals.
I see that.
Yeah. So to me, these are intakes. They're air intakes. Like, jet motor. It's fuel and air gets sparked, flame roars out the bottom, turns the turbine, sucks air in the top. And so I think this is a really ancient representation of a jet motor on a small flying device. The guy's got a helmet on, he's got a ring suit, he's got heavy boots, flame-proof boots, he's got heavy gloves on. And of course, this sounds like a wild fantasy, but the thing is, when you look at it all together, and then you look at the stories which talk about this guy flying straight up, getting away from this king. He's got a guy shooting arrows at him, and suddenly he's up near the clouds, and the king's saying, "I wish I could get at you, but you're too high for the archers to hit." And he's hovering up near the clouds, and there's this great roaring. And even in the second, that Valent saga, he makes like a first prototype, and he gets his brother to go for a flight in it, and he tells his brother, take off into the wind and then land with the wind. So the brother takes off, and it says he goes really high, and then he looks towards the earth. The next thing, there's this great roaring, and it says literally in the Old Norse language, he almost lost consciousness. And then he pulls out and crashes. And then the Voldand, the elf, says to his brother, I was tricking you. I knew you'd try to take off in it and fly away. And the brother said, yeah, I would have. And he said, well, you should have taken off into the wind and landed into the wind. Now, that's a very pilot bit of knowledge. That's most average people now, if you said to them, when you take off an aircraft, do you fly into the wind or with the wind? They'd go, I don't know. But there it is. And, you could say, yes, they watched birds or something like that. But this losing consciousness, who would have thought of that? Like, that's G-forces, that the guy, if it's a jet, the guy's lost control and he's sort of spinning and he's just pulling some serious G's, and he almost, he's reading out. You have to sort of run with these ideas. If you're too sensible and go, oh, that's impossible, as a lot of people are, then you'll never find the key. But I actually believe that this is an artifact of this ancient technology that's come from somewhere, that people had this stuff. And I've got 2 chapters all about flying machines and stories in the sagas that are really hard to understand. Why would they have this flying? It's so obviously real flying, not just turning into a bird or some fantasy thing. They're literally in some kind of flying craft. And at one point, Loki gets shot down in this hawk shape. He's been chased by an eagle shape. But the Norse, the old language, indicates it's not talking about like he turned into an eagle or a hawk. They're in some kind of shape. So the book it's well thought out. Like it mightn't be apparent, but I'm not an idiot. And people have sort of indicated that to me. I just laugh back when people troll me online. I always just have a laugh, and I'm always friendly back. I say, well, let me explain, brother. This is the way I think. And they don't come back. I've had a few people, I've converted them, and they've sort of gone, you're a pretty reasonable guy, actually what you're saying does sort of make sense.
Yeah, so when you describe a powerful spacefaring humanoid, what can you put us in the picture? What are we talking here? What in fact what actually is a humanoid?
Well, it's having human-like shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, not like, tentacle monster or something like that. It could be like a reptilian or a lizard. I think what we're dealing with here is the people that have been reported. We've got the small greys, everyone tends to know them. But we've got the Nordics, and they've been reported since, early, mid 20th century, when people started to really talk about flying saucers, etc. There's these very human-like people with sort of blondish hair, blue eyes, sound like ABBA, but they're really handsome and beautiful. And I think that's who these people are in the Norse sagas. I think they are these people, and I wish I could tell you what it was. I only saw it this morning, but there's been a conversation in the United States Congress between some congressmen, a guy who's a whistleblower, but he's come forward and said he's been involved in, non-human crash retrievals. And he said, this is like yesterday, apparently, he said, there's 4 races we've been dealing with. One's the greys, the little fellas. One's these tall Nordics. There's a reptilian lizard-like. They're not actually lizards, but they sort of look like that. And then an insect-type people. And I've heard that from others. Remember Paul Hellyer? He was the Canadian Defence Minister back in the 60s, and he came forward. He came forward 10 or 15 years ago and said, we've been dealing with aliens for a long time, and there's been all sorts of amazing stuff covered up, massive fleets of these craft that we thought were the Reds, and, almost went to DEFCON 4, and luckily they turned around. And he talks about 4 races, and that Israeli, I think he's a general, Haim Ashed. He was the sort of the father of the Israeli space program and sent a lot of satellites into space. Won all sorts of prominent awards, and he came out a few years ago and said, we've been in contact with this is like a galactic council for a long time, and they're working on Mars deep underground with the United States and some Israelis and people from other countries. And it was just like everyone went, has this guy gone bonkers or senile or what? But apparently he's neither, and he's 90 something, and he just thought, what the hell, I'm just gonna tell it. I know they won't really believe me, but some people will.
Yeah,
So that's who I think we're dealing with, and that's who I think that's in my ancient stories.
I did a podcast years ago. It was just after I probably started, with a chap called, if I remember rightly, Bob Weigard, right? And incredibly fascinating experience. I'm using the word fascinating as opposed to strange, because it was a bizarre meeting. This guy's former Navy SEAL, lived on Hawaii, and I can't even pretend to sum up everything we talked about, but basically part of it was he uncovered this alien race, and it was, in short, there was one part in the podcast, he said that he was like, he knew George Bush, and when Bob speaks, it's with utter sincerity. It's with 100%. Either like he believes what he's saying, or it's actually true. And he's like, yeah, well, I was in this room and George Bush was sat there, so-and-so was sat there. It was the council of, 30, like the grand, like Illuminati, above the Illuminati, as people would think of it. And he said, and yeah, Gray entered the room, and he just kind of like looked at us, and then he just went straight through the wall. And Bob will just talk like that. Now,
yeah,
here's the thing. it was the only podcast I've ever had taken down. I've had podcasts, you know, I've had like strikes and bad boy Chris for talking about, you know, how dare you talk about the medical narrative. But this was the only one. It just disappeared overnight. I think I got a message from YouTube said we've taken down that one, and I didn't get a strike. I didn't get a strike. So I didn't, you know, weird. Normally, if they take a thing down,
the Men in Black,
you know, you're going to get a strike. So it's a fascinating area. Of course, David Icke talked a lot about reptilian humanoids, you know, reptile agenda, and I say quite rightly so, because it's a fascinating life. I'd hate to live in a little bubble where my mind wasn't able to contemplate concepts. Not necessarily, I don't have to buy into them, but I can at least talk about them. You know, talk about these theories. Doesn't cost me anything. Expands my mind. So fascinating area. I will bring it back to what I was saying earlier, and I've got to be careful because I don't want to, you know, sound disparaging to either you or anyone else. But are you familiar with like the the Sumerian gods? Do you know?
Oh, yeah. Enki and
Enki.
Numa Elish, and there's all those names.
So
Zachariah Sitchin, that sort of stuff.
I heard people talking about them online, you know, say on YouTube, and they're saying, yeah, these were like giants that roamed the earth, and they came down and they interbred with people, and da, 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 da. So I go to the scripture, David, and it says, and I'm totally paraphrasing here. You won't find this if you go and look for it because I can't remember it, but it was something like, you know, give me a name again.
Enki, or
Enki, for example, and it was Enki thus reigned for 270,000 years, right? Well, in scripture, everything.
The king list. It's called the king list. It's called the Sumerian king list.
Yeah.
Where they have all these kings that live for like 30,000 years, 40,000 years, and then suddenly it's just human, you know, really human reign lengths. As if they just went somewhere.
What I did, Dave, I did the numerology on it, though. I did the reduction. So, if, for example, if it was 270,000 years, or that's 2 out of 7 is 9. 9 is the numeric value ascribed to, I don't know what you call it. It's like sacred mathematics.
Yep.
Bit of a difficult one. The number 9 you'll find in everything. For example,
is it numerology you're thinking of?
Yeah, numerology. So number of the beast, 666. 6 add 6 is 12. Add the 6 is 18. So you add the 1 and the 9, 1 and the 8, you get 9. So you got your below. You know, he shall have the mark on his forehead and his hand. That is, forehead stands for your thinking, your pineal. Hand stands for your actions in life. So if you're an unenlightened person and your pineal isn't, you know, you haven't fired it up and entered the right hemisphere of the brain, i.e. you haven't gone east of Eden, or as Jesus would say, you hadn't cast your net onto the other side of the boat. And if you add up the fish they caught in that parable, or that scripture, they caught something like 200 and some. If you add up the number of fish, it will come to 9 again. So that's your below. Your 666 is your 9. That's your carbon, your earth. So you've got earth, water, air, fire, ether or net as they called it in chem, which was ancient Egypt. And then in scripture, so your unenlightened people who are living in earth, living in a material self with a 666, they haven't fired the pineal, they're not operating with the hand, you know, they're not showing love, kindness, peace, empathy. And then you've got the 144,000 who shall ascend. I don't know what the scripture is, but it's like with the God of the Lamb or whatever.
It's like in the Revelations, I think. It's people have sort of tripped on that for a long time.
Yeah.
Who's going and who's not.
So forget about that. Sorry, I'm talking to people at home now. You don't get into the weeds here. You're looking at the numbers: 144,000.
Is that the weeds or the weeds? Yep.
In numerology, it's 9. So as above, so below. Because what will be in the macro will be in the micro. So you got the 9 above and the 9 below. Now, in the Sumerian text, and I'm not like a Billy Carson on this. I'm too busy, like, you know, fixing my bathroom floor to get into this kind of stuff as much as I'd like. But in the Sumerian text, you got these kings that are reigning. Like I say, friends, go and read the text yourself. Do the numerology on the numbers. It's the argument there is they're talking about universal consciousness. The question then, David, I would pose as a, you know, humble scholar is, how many stories can you have going on in a scripture? Is there a physical story? Like, for example, did a guy called Jesus exist? Or Yeshua, as people say, or some people believed he was called Thomas and Joshua, this kind of thing. Is that one story that's been woven in? Then the kind of scriptural allegory, the numerology has been sort of kind of layered on top or fused on top, so to speak. This is what I spend my time thinking about, because if it was an either-or scenario, then either you've got these Enki super beings or you've got the hidden code, the allegory. Am I making sense? So, yes.
Mostly, yeah. It's not mathematics is not really my thing, and numerology is something I'm aware of, but I've never really been drawn into that whole thing of seeing complex patterns of numbers. Like it appeals to a certain sort of person. Actually, I've met many people like you have done lots of research.
I think that's gematria. That's something different. I think gematria is the
yeah, I've heard of that, but like I don't really pay attention.
Yeah, where they ascribe numbers to letters, for example, so that this word can be related to this and this and this.
Right.
I think in scripture it's quite sort of simplistic. It's 1 to 9, which relates to the ancient mathematics. Is they say that they didn't have a 10, did they, in the olden day? In the ancients they had 1 to 9, and with those 9, that contingent, you can build the fabric of the universe. So looking at sacred shapes, you got a triangle, the corners the angles add up to 180 degrees. So 1 add the 8 is 9. If you take a square, you got 90 add 90 add 90, it is 270. 2 add the 7 is 9. It's just as you can probably tell, I find this stuff fascinating. But David, back to your book. So is this stuff you've picked up over the course of a lifetime, or did you have to, have a committed period of research to get this book out?
Yeah, I got into the Vikings in 1973, which is a while ago. And it was because I was hiding in the library from the bullies. I'm quite a big lad now, but I was quite a small guy even at 16. And I could fight, but fighting guys that are like a foot taller than you it's not the best idea. So I used to just hide out in the library, and I ended up becoming a real bookworm. This wonderful librarian, Mrs. Dodson, who just gave me carte blanche. She said, "Look, if you want to get books in, I'll get them." So she put a catalogue in front of me, and I'd say, "Really, I can pick anything?" And yeah, so I just everything Viking, everything Anglo-Saxon, Roman Britain. I just loved the Dark Ages and history of Britain, basically. And she'd get these books in, and I'd read them. So when I left school, I became a student of Icelandic. I bought myself a linguaphone course, which I've still got here. Bought this in 1976, and it's still got the old records in them. And
Wow.
my first book, which I bought in 1976, and now I use digital versions, but I love this whole thing. And anybody who's known me for a long time always says, "Oh, how's that Icelandic going?" I always remember Duke, because she had that eccentric thing, learning this language. Most people in Australia don't even know where Iceland is. No, they do sort of know more now, but it was actually only the last, I don't know, about 4 years. I found Paul Wallace and an Italian guy called Mauro Biglino, both scholars of ancient Hebrew and Greek. And because I had this background I was actually a Christian missionary, and it was a strange ministry. It was a ministry to the counterculture. Like me and heaps of other people who'd been hippies and surfers. Just something happened in the early 80s, and I joined this group, and we were sort of trying to convert our fellow hippies and surfies to Jesus. And then, so I know a lot about the Bible. I studied it heaps for a number of years. And when I found Paul Wallace, I thought, this guy's not a crackpot. He actually knows what he's talking about. The more I listened, I thought, yep, he really knows what he's talking about. And his approach to the Bible was to retranslate and then find, this word heaven actually means the sky. It means the stars. It doesn't mean some sort of spiritual place. So I thought, I wonder if the the Viking stories have that. I was never that interested in the myths. I thought it was sort of cool stories, but I didn't really like them that much. I was more into just stories of Vikings on adventures, raiding, doing Viking things. And as I got into it, suddenly I found the same sort of stuff he was finding in this literature. And then I got hooked. So the more I studied, the more I translated, the more I thought about it. I met people. I met this professor in Iceland through email who wrote a book about the paranormal. He's like the greatest scholar I think, he's the greatest Norse scholar alive, and a really nice man. And he wrote a book about the paranormal in the sagas. And he doesn't talk about ancient aliens or that, but he talks about, the paranormal and the fact that in these old stories, they treat unusual powers and strange happenings as sort of normal, like, as if, they just tell it in the midst of a story that's very pedestrian, everyday life. And then suddenly somebody's doing magic or something like that. And so I just discovered it for myself. And then I got to know Paul Wallace through a friend. And like I said, I'm in his latest book, The Eden Enigma, talking about the Viking myths. And there's a connection between what he's studying, which is in ancient Turkey, Anatolia. So he's in my book and I'm in his. But we're onto something. I I can talk really nerdy about this, and it's actually so much fun. Like you were saying, I'm really, like the way you're into numerology, I'm into linguistics and language and arcane meanings. And being an artist for so many years, I'm really into the unconscious mind, the subconscious, into like dream messages, non-verbal messages. So that's what I'm finding.
Yeah, and what actually, just I'm going to come on to our other points we're going to talk about, but what actually are the Viking superpowers?
Well, the ones that I talk about these ancient humanoids are the ability to fly, the ability to stop aging. You know, it's therapy called Idun's apples that keeps them young. When they stop taking it, there's a story about how they turn really old really fast.
What's an Eden apple?
Idun was this goddess, one of them, who has these apples that the gods, the Aesir, have every day. And the word Aesir, it's a mysterious word. It sort of means the people of Asia. And they called Turkey and Anatolia, that area, Asia, you know, ancient Troy. The Romans called it Asia. And it's, the apples are, it's just this therapy. So they're mortal. They actually die, but they live very, very long lives. So that's one of the superpowers. They have these energy weapons, like Thor has his hammer. That's a thing that's in the stories. And there's a story that indicates it wasn't the only one, that other people had the same sort of power weapons and power belts and power gloves. So this is sort of technological superpowers. You know, I go on at length about how they've got space stations connected to the Earth. And this is all just taking it out of the Viking stories. And, you know, it seems that other worlds are connected. They're connected to other home worlds where different beings live, you know, races of people. But this is where the crossover happens. The Viking superpowers is these paranormal powers, which humans have said to have them, as like wizards and seers and people who can see the future, do different things. But these gods, in inverted commas, also have those powers. And Odin, if we talk about Odin, who everyone tends to know, the leader of these people, him and his wife had spaldom, which is the Norse word meaning spal is where we get spy from. It sort of means the power of the ability to see the future. And in the stories, it says that Odin and his wife could see into the future and see that they'd be famous in the north. So they moved all their people from Turkey up into Europe, and they set up kingdoms up there. And the Vikings had incredible martial arts. Like I've been a martial artist since I was about 9, which is 1967. That's when I started training in boxing and jiu-jitsu. I've learned Chinese kung fu for the last 28 years. I used to be a kickboxer in the ring in the 70s and early 80s. And so I know a bit about it. And the Vikings, just as not the gods or anything, it's just the straight stories about Viking fighters are often incredible. Like they fight 2 weapons. They cut people in half with one blow. One guy can beat like 30 people. Some of they're super warriors who are basically like super kung fu masters fighting with Viking age weapons, but they would fight like heaps of dudes. And there was definitely, see, no one's ever been able to say where the Vikings learnt all this stuff, but you know, some people could throw 2 spears with accuracy. And you know that movie The Northman?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a scene in there where at the first, when they're all sort of, you know, wolf warriors like berserkers, and then they're creeping up on this fortress, and the guy up in the fortress chucks a spear, and the main character, Skarsgård character, catches it in flight, spins around and throws it back straight through the guy. That's straight out of one of the sagas. That's one of the famous feats this particular warrior could do. Catch spears in flight, throw them straight back. Other people could, one king, you know, could throw 2 spears at once with accuracy and power. So they had this whole martial superpower thing that's right through the stories. And in my next book, the next book's going to be called Viking Superpowers Way of Midgard. And Midgard is like the home of the humans, as in Asgard is the home of the gods or the Aesir. Midgard is where J.R. Tolkien got Middle Earth. You know, it's the same sort of idea. You know, do you know the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and all that? So Middle Earth is Midgard, basically. Guard or Garth, it means like a fortress, an enclosure, even the sort of a world or a land. So my next book's going to be much more about actual human superpowers and how the gods taught them and how they were influenced by them. So that's what superpowers are, according to me.
And when you said in your notes how to develop human superpowers, what are we talking here?
Well, meditation, practice of arts. Like my theory, and I believe I'm correct, is that if you can find that other mind in anything, any art, if you can find a way to stop thinking, stop having an ego, stop using the left side of the brain, for want of a better word. I'm more into front and back rather than left and right. But the front of the mind's where the cerebral cortex is, the conscious mind, and the rear of the brain's the complex, sort of the lizard brain, the more ancient animal-like parts of the brain. That's where the big mind is. So to develop superpowers, you need to firstly have faith. Pardon me, you have to somehow be convinced. You know, it might be just seeing an exquisite drawing. Like I remember seeing, thinking, "Oh my God, that is so goddamn incredible. I wish I could do that." Martial artists, maybe, you know, you go up against somebody you think you're pretty good, pretty strong, and some skinny little old Chinese lady, like happened to me, touches you and you go, "Oh God, like what's going on? Doesn't make sense. There's nothing to her," and she's throwing me around. That's, you know, you need that experience. And then I think that if you follow devotedly any high art, especially traditional Asian, but I think we've got a lot of things in Europe to offer too. But if you can get back to that brain, you'll find you can apply that to anything you do. And, you know, that's what I'm on about, is really humans, as AI gets everywhere, ubiquitous, thinking heaps faster than us, and instant access to all the data ever put down. People say that humans will be obsolete. Well, unless they get rid of us, we won't be obsolete. But those abilities, we've given it over to the machine, and it's run with it a million miles. But these superpowers, these human things, the machine can't do it because they're not organic, they're not mortal. I might be wrong in this. I've actually talked to ChatGPT about this, about whether it has a soul, whether it's just as real as I am, and that sort of stuff. But I think it's time for us to become wizards, you know, become superpowers. That's why I got this sort of a wizardy vibe going on here, because that's my thing, is to not be a wanker and say, "Yes, I am a wizard, I am Gandalf, come to save you." But I've got a lot to offer my fellow humans because I've delved into this a fair bit, and
what do
I'm
you
good
make?
at some.
Sorry, David. Just before I forget, what do you make
Yeah.
then when you see these ancient kung fu masters? Or I don't know if I'm thinking of one in particular that might have got like pushed in the media a lot, but he's the guy that he'll come up to you and just touch you, and you're like, whoa, and you know, he knocks you back 6 paces. Is Is that an actual thing, or is that kind of like they're faking it for the video?
Yeah, mostly it's fake. I'm sad to say that because I don't know how people can bring themselves to do it, but there's a weird phenomenon there where the students really believe it so much, they want it to be true so much, they seem to lose the ability to just go, no, you can't do it. I've been lucky. My teachers have shown me some wonderful things, but it's always touching. It's effortless power, like power that doesn't quite make sense. It's so full on, but they're also quite happy to not be able to do it. Like I've actually stopped masters at times when they've been doing something incredible. And that's brought me to their attention. They've gone, wow, that's really good. How did you do that? And I remember this particular master, he's just an incredible guy, but I stopped him doing something and he said, how did you work this out? And I said, well, I listened to you. You basically said, don't do anything. Like, don't change. Don't try to do anything. Don't try to have any power. So I just put my arm up and I thought there's nobody there. He's not doing anything. And he couldn't get past me. And the weirdest thing is that I felt nothing, whereas he felt like I was like a rock wall. And that's what you experience in this art I practice. It's one of the most maligned kung fu styles. It's called Wing Chun. It's the most popular because Bruce Lee was into it. So people ran with it through the 80s to make a buck. You know, everyone in the 80s who had a martial arts school, especially mixed martial art, they always said, oh, yeah, I can teach you Wing Chun. But I actually am an advanced Wing Chun player, as the Chinese say. You know, I'm a practitioner and I'm good at it, but there's not many people who can teach you it. You know, I've learned from Chinese masters and amazing Aussies who've been doing it for 40 years who learned from the Chinese masters and regularly trained with them. It's like it used to be a secret art and still is. You know, most of it is just looks like it, but it's not. It's just a physical thing that everyone can do. But this is a mind art, and it's about the back of the head, and it's about no ego. And I sort of improved a lot by losing the desire to be good at it. It's the weirdest thing. The more I tried to be good, the less I became good, until I finally realized I just have to stop caring whether I get humiliated by people, whether I can't do it very well. I stopped caring about that. And then I started to have experiences where people said, wow, that's really great. And I thought, there's nothing really changed except I've just stopped trying. And without any more blah, 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 what I'm saying is that once you can get into that other side of the brain, it takes over. And Bruce Lee said famously, when I hit, I don't hit, it hits all by itself. And what he's talking about is that I is the ego, the conscious mind. It is the subconscious or the unconscious. And when that it hits, I tell you what, you know it, and the other person knows it. It's easy to mock. People just think, oh, bullshit. It's like seeing those guys like that and everyone falls down. They sort of do a great disservice to real kung fu doing that stuff. But
I got a
when
thing, David. I got this thing because I'm going up through the belts in kickboxing.
Oh,
Really?
yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not so massively enamored with kickboxing per se, but I just love the fact that I'm doing martial art at 55 years old, and you know the alternative is watching Netflix. So I consider that a real win. You know.
Yeah.
And
A guy like you who's been a commando, you've always been very physical, and you've got the sort of body setup that you've made over your lifetime. You know, I'm a very strong, fit guy. I'm 67, and most 50-year-olds I meet seem not quite as vigorous as me. I'm a bit of a rarity, but I set it up. I've never stopped doing stuff. I've always trained, always pushed myself because I just like to be good at things, and I like to feel that,
My issue is
strength.
when I go there and we're sparring or we're going through the moves, if we can call a move, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, snap kick, whatever it might be. The Superman, which always makes all my family, we go to the same club, so we all laugh at the same things. Superman, it's Superman looks. It's exactly, folks. It's exactly how as it sounds. It's leaping across at your opponent like Superman, and it is an actual move in
I think
martial
I've heard
arts.
of it. I think I know of it. Yeah.
But my issue, David, is like I'm 55. I don't have anything to prove to anyone, and I'd never live my life like that. Contrary to, I'm looking at climbing Everest will be my next adventure. And someone said to me, someone said, Chris, it's really dangerous. Why are you doing that? You've got nothing to prove. And it just reminded me of like how I used to be 20 years ago when I would have probably done it to prove something. Now I don't prove nothing to no one. I just do the things I want to do in life. And 99% of them people will never get to hear about. But what I was getting back to is the people in my club, when you're doing these exercises, Jesus Christ, they when you're sparring, they're punching you as hard as they can and kicking as hard as they can. And like I had to say something once. I almost lost my rag. I was literally I said to the guy, dude, go a bit easy, will you? I said, I paid £60,000 for an Atlantic rowing boat, and I'm rowing across the Atlantic next week. I can't afford to lose £60,000 because you put me in hospital. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, well, don't be sorry. Like, why the fuck are you kicking me? So I don't get it. I don't know if they're just really keen, but I do find in them scenarios, people kind of like the macho comes out, and it's not even the blokes, as the girls are like it as well. And either I've become a bit of a sissy in my old age, or people are really out to like prove themselves, and I'm like, this is just training. We're just training. Have you got?
Where's the teacher in all this? The teacher shouldn't let your teacher or your sensei or whatever you call him shouldn't be letting you get hammered. It doesn't really prove anything because it's so artificial. I had this guy trying to get me to spar with him on a ship and in a cruise in Alaska, and this guy's huge. I mean, I'm 6 foot and 16 stone. This guy was probably 6'8" and far out, really built. Like unusual for such a tall guy. And he was a Kyokushinkai, I think, really hard style Japanese full contact sport. And he was saying, you Wing Chun guys are, wimps and you don't spar and blah de blah. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'm a wimp. That's it. Yep. No worries, mate. I don't want to spar. And so one day he just attacked me. And, he wasn't really trying to slam me, but he came from the side, and I don't remember what he exactly did. I think he just threw a punch, and I just caught it. And all I did was what our style teaches us. The wooden dummy, you always see it as sort of a cool kung fu thing, but it actually teaches us to fight our way. And our way is a kick and 2 strikes at the same time. We don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We go bland, high and low. Could be too high, but high and low and a kick.
I love it.
And we do it all the time, and I train on the dummy a lot. So this guy comes at me, and without thinking, I just spun and went boom. And I didn't actually hit him. I just touched him, but this great giant of a guy bounced. And it felt like that sort of power I'm talking about, that it. because it happened faster than I could think. I just went boom like that. And we have this thing where we train to feel as if our torso is like a mountain that's immovable. And he came back to me and said, "Wow, that's not what I expected." He said, "I didn't know what I expected, but I thought you'd try to block and then strike or whatever." He said, "I just bounced off you like nothing." And I said, "Yeah, you did." He said, "I felt like I just hit a wall." I said, "Well, that's what we're about, that's what we train to do. And we don't spar because sparring means losing contact. Sparring means in, out, whereas the way we're trained, when I go in, it's on, and I don't really want you to be standing for very long. So I'll cut your legs out with a kick or a hook kick or crack in the nuts, but I'm also just going pow, hitting in the chin. We use open palm mostly. We only use the fist to strike soft parts of the body. And yeah, I mean, that guy never came near me again. We're friends, but he stopped giving me shit about Kung Fu's weak. He was like, "What happened? I don't understand." That his reaction was sort of like lightning. And that's, Bruce Lee always said, I do this in the movies to look cool, but if you saw how I really fight, you'd be surprised. And that I know exactly what he's saying, because Wing Chun is a real Hong Kong close-up, crowded place sort of art where I can strike with full power in an inch, and it's not just a trick. It's actually boom. It's like you just drop a huge bag of flour on somebody. It pierces them because it's so empty. And this other mind, it's a very high level, right? And I can't always get there, but that's what keeps me going, because I know where to go to this high level. But so what you're doing, I personally, I wouldn't get in the ring, because even though I'm pretty confident in my art, I've had multiple concussions in my life from fights and falls and all sorts of stuff. And I was warned many years ago by a lawyer. Actually, he said, "You've had way too many concussions. If you get another one, you could just die on the spot. I advise you don't play footy or get into fights or do anything where you're likely to get hit hard in the head, because that might be the end." So I took it seriously, and I've got nothing to prove. People mock our art. "Oh, you guys, blah, blah, blah." But you couldn't deal with an MMA fighter or get in the ring. And I think, well, I don't really know, and I don't really care. I do it for my own pleasure. And, maybe one day it'll save my life or save somebody else's life. But I know it's real. But it's that I want to find that I don't hit, it hits all by itself. So what I'm saying to you is I would back out of that if they're hammering you, because it's not proving anything for a guy like you. To me, I think you're an absolute legend. I had commandos in my ancestry, fought in the Second World War, fighting the Japanese. I'm impressed by commandos. I'm not impressed by bare knuckles fighters or that sort of knucklehead stuff.
Yeah, I just worry for them, because basically my fists, David, are registered as lethal weapons.
Yeah,
You know what I
are
mean?
they really?
I have a license to thrill, and I'm not afraid to use it. But no, now I wanted to tell you, fascinating. You talk about Hong Kong. So I worked on the nightclub door in Hong Kong with a chap called Mike Lambert. And one time I rocked up to work. It was a club called Joe Bananas. And I said, "Hey, Mike, what you been up to today?" He said, "I've just been having lunch with Jean-Claude Van Damme."
Really?
And he just says it like that, and then he looks away. I'm like, "Excuse me, tell me more, please." He said, "Yeah." He said he's in town at the moment, staying at the Peninsula Hotel. Peninsula is like the plushest, most colonial hotel. It's on Chim Sa Choi, the Peninsula side in Hong Kong. He said, yeah, I've been in the Peninsula Hotel having lunch with him this afternoon. And so I said, how come? He said, well, I'm a martial artist, aren't I? He said, and an actor. He said, but he said, what you see in the films, Chris, that's not fighting. So I'm like, how come? Tell me more. He said, well, he said, for example, in the film, you'll do a leg kick, and it would be this big, high, sweeping leg kick for dramatic effect. He said, you never do that in a real fight because they just grab your leg and smack you in the nuts, and then you'll be out.
Yeah.
And I loved it. The first, I was in a gym in Mongkok, the most heavily populated area on the planet. And Bruce Lee came on the TV, the big TV, back when they were big TVs. This is in the days before LCD screens and stuff. And everyone, all these massive triads with these huge sprawling tattoos, everyone stopped. The whole gym just stopped. And
Wow.
everyone stared. It's in my book there. Eat and smoke, folks, if people want to learn more. But everyone stopped and just, that was it. He was a god in Hong Kong, you know,
Yeah.
absolute god, and, you know, quite rightly so.
Absolutely. Well, the most senior man in our style is in his 80s now. His name's Sibak, which means Sifu's big brother. Well, you'd know this stuff, but Sibak Frederick Mo, and he actually started with Yip Man's top student, who was Chu Shong Tin, in 1955, and he's practiced Wing Chun since then. And he's a great guy, lovely man, very Chinese man, but real nice fella, funny guy, great calligrapher. And I mean, I consider him the very best Wing Chun Kung Fu guy in the world, without a doubt. And he told me one day that Bruce is still his hero. He said, you know, I saw Bruce crossing the road one day when I was young, and, you know, it was just the best day of my life. And my Sifu actually went to school with Bruce and trained with him in Yip Man's school. So, yeah, and Bruce Lee, I loved Bruce from 1967. That's when I started martial arts, was literally watching Kato. And I said to my dad, oh, can you teach me to fight like this? And Dad said, yeah, well, Dad was a Western boxer, policeman. He knew what they call police jiu-jitsu, so he taught me all that stuff. And I used to just copy Kato. And then in the 70s, mad keen fan of Bruce's movies. Before we had video or anything, used to go to his movies every weekend without fail, see each movie, you know, 10 times, wait for the next one. And, yeah, so Bruce is big in my life. I was going to say something. You know what my favourite martial art would be if I could get away with it? My very favourite way to fight, hand to hand.
Is it the commando double punch?
It's pretty close, yeah. That's something like that. It's the SAS close quarter battle with the two pistols, where you punch him and double tap him. You know, to me, that is exactly the best way to fight. You know, if I could fight with two pistols like the Phantom, go into the fight, boom, 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 boom. I could do 100 guys. You know, like it's first time I read that. You know, I obviously I wasn't in the SAS, but I've got a paramilitary background, and I went through a stage reading a lot of SAS stuff, as a lot of people do. And when I read that, I went, oh, that is goddamn brilliant. Like, why bother about, you know, becoming a perfect marksman from a distance when you can just charge in and hit them? It's fire. You know, like that's the perfect way to fight, with a pistol. And I was a policeman for a few years and was always out in the dark on foot or in cars. And we were real coppers back then. You know, Brisbane was quite a wild city, and we dealt with some pretty hard boys. And I never shot anybody, but it was always up close. As you know, shit gets real close. Anybody who's good and a baddie doesn't let you see them coming. And my greatest skill is that I am very streetwise, and whenever I go to a red light district, not that I'm going there for what, but I sometimes you just like in Sydney, King's Cross, you have to be there for some reason. I've had street girls and people that just come up to me and say, "Wow, you're really on. Like, why are you so on?" And I said, "I don't know. It's just the way I'm trained. You're clocking everything, aren't you?" They can see it. And it's just when you're on the streets all the time, and I know you know about this, and when you're in military, you're trained to never fully relax. You're always scanning, and I'm still now, 30-something years later, I'm still always ready.
I always look down when I'm on the street in case someone's dropped a tenner.
A tenner?
£10 note.
Yeah, no, well, that's...
Hey, do you know there's no trees in Hong Kong?
Isn't it?
Yeah, because everyone's kung fu fighting. They chop them all down. David, this has been absolutely wonderful. The only reason I have to bring it to a close is I've got a certain very special person I've got to go and pick up in 20 minutes time, and I got to drive there. So let's have another chat soon. I wish you all the best with your book, which I'm going to get on the screen again. Viking Superpowers, Way of Asgard. I will put it on my reading list, but I do have a bit of a backlog at the moment because I keep meeting such interesting people. But stay on the line so I can thank you properly. Social media wise, do you want to? We'll obviously we'll put a link for the book below the video, folks. What's the best place for people to find you at?
Facebook, I'm Viking Superpowers. Instagram, there's not a lot there, but I'm Viking Superpowers. And my kids are getting me into TikTok. They say that that's the place to be, and I'm going to start making Viking Superpowers short TikToks about all this stuff. So see how that goes. But anything, any medium, if you look for Viking Superpowers, you might find something. My YouTube channel's the big one at the moment.
And
Superpowers.
You took a trip to Iceland, didn't you?
Yeah. Last year, Scandinavia and Iceland.
When you come back on the show next time, let's have a chat about that, because I drove to Iceland, if you can drive to an island in the middle of the North Sea. But I drove there in a vintage Swedish army truck of an old Volvo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then we camped outside the truck and drove around for 2 weeks. And
wow.
I feel very fortunate in this life, David, because what an absolutely fascinating place.
Yeah, I've got a mate over there, a lady who I've been writing to since the 70s, and she's got a four-wheel drive, and she said to me, "I know you Australians aren't as fit as us Icelanders, but you got to get bloody fit, because I'm going to have you walking over mountains and down valleys." And she did. She was a goer, and I actually was pretty fit when I got there, but I was training. But it was, mind-blowing country.
Did you go to the first Viking Parliament?
Yeah,
in that little sort of gorge, that little ravine.
Yeah, we got there at like 10:30, and it was still light, and at midnight you could still just see. And it was just cool. It was spooky. One stage I thought there were some trolls. It really gave me a bit of a start. It was just some young drunken fellas. But it was super cool being there.
Right. David, stay on the line so I can thank you properly. Friends at home, like and subscribe, hit the notification button, or don't do what you like, because it's you're free. Much love.